Welcome. This is Jack's Tea Party. This is my guest, Larry Merrill, I'm Jack Porter. Larry, you've been with the Michigan Townships Association for a long time now, haven't you?
Seems like it, although it also seems just like yesterday. Time flies.
Yeah. Well, I got into it in 1980. I was elected township supervisor in East Bay, and
I remember.
Yeah, we were there for 12 years. You had Jack LaRose was your only other boss, right? And
Right.
then you came into his position, so there hasn't been a lot of turnover in MTA. What exactly is the MTA?
Well, MTA is a statewide advocacy organization for townships. Almost all local governments, not almost, without qualification. There's an organization that represents cities, one for counties, road commissions, school districts, intermediate school districts, and our role and responsibility are Michigan's 1,240 townships.
1,240 townships. And that's roughly half the people in Michigan are governed by
Correct.
township government, huh?
Right.
Okay. And now, a lot of people don't know how this works, but city government and township government are local government, right?
Certainly.
And county government is like a layer up, right?
Yeah, it tends to be labeled, I think the legislature considers it to be local government. We tend to look at the counties as partners, but they do a level of services that tend to be intermediate between the state. And in many ways, the counties are an instrumentality of the state government. They run the courts, social services, health care. A lot of those things they actually do with state oversight.
So they have their own jobs under state law, just like townships and cities. And of course, the village is the last thing, and that's kind of a hybrid. That's a kind of a municipal government laid on top of township
Or
government.
underneath it, depending upon what your frame of reference might be.
Right, okay. So a large part of the land area of Michigan is
96% of the land area is townships.
Okay, so it is a very legitimate and well-established form of local government.
It's kind of the bedrock here.
Yeah, and cost-effective too. And I was a township guy for 12 years, and at that time, the county was talking about we need city-county government. Townships should be obsolete, and maybe they should really eliminate township government.
Who was saying that?
A lot of county commissioners.
Oh, like up in this area?
Yeah, in this area.
Yeah.
And it goes around in cycles. I've seen people say, "Oh, township government is the problem," and I never felt that way. I have always respected the people who work for townships.
Sure. And I came out of county government.
Oh,
I worked in county government before I came to MTA, and I never heard any of my county commissioners ever saying anything but the most respect for the townships, and understand that there were different roles and responsibilities. My county board didn't want to take over the functions, the boots on the ground things that the townships do.
Right. Well, right now the county, and when I was in it, the county did a lot of coordinating through the county DPW. And they also took over health department functions, and they count the dogs, of course. That was the township supervisor's job before the county did it. But anyway, the county is providing services, but it's like each of the townships has a seat on the DPW, and they're all kind of they're working together, but they also want to keep their own township in front, if you know what I mean.
No, I guess I don't. I'm not sure I do.
Well, every time you sign an agreement, there's winners and losers.
Is that true?
Well,
Can't you come up with an agreement that is a win-win for everybody?
Well, a living agreement. Yeah, that's what should happen. That's what should happen. But when we negotiated the sewer agreement, the city had one position, the townships had another position, and the urban townships were different than the cities. We were talking about should we split up the bills by volume or by the number of users or by the growth, and then it started raining, and suddenly all the flows into the sewer plant changed, and the city changed their position, the townships changed their position because conditions changed. And what's happening is people get locked into contracts based on what the conditions are at this time, and then conditions change, and some people win, some people lose, and then how do you renegotiate the contract on the fly?
Depends on the contract.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of contracts.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of authorities and different ways of working around it. But whenever something changes, you're in a position of renegotiating and trying to keep your unit of government from losing control and from losing money. And
looking out for your own best interest.
Well, right.
Yeah.
And being independent. And I think I said before we got on camera that I was very disappointed when the work I did, we built a water main the full length of East Bay Township to serve Acme Township, well, serve East Bay primarily, but made it possible to serve Acme Township. And then a supervisor that followed me got together with the board and the engineers and broke away from that water system. And it created a fragmented water system. And we cooperate on fire, but you know, there's fragmentations always coming up when you try to govern and then conditions change and you're locked into contracts.
Right.
So my idea is, at least at the DPW level, to maybe make an authority. And there was a lot of talk about that a couple of years ago, and then one of their consultants said, well, you really aren't going to save much money on an authority and you're going to lose local control, so you probably don't want to do it. And so they backed away from that. And every time you try to do something together, you bump into this idea of local control. And it was a long time for me to come to this idea of an annexation. But the urban townships surrounding Traverse City are 40,000 people. Traverse City, 18,000 people. And yet they have a budget and they have a central position that gives that 18,000 people has a lot more power than any individual township, even though we may have the same number of people.
Or far more.
Or in our case, more than double.
Yeah, if all those townships were absorbed into the city, those city residents, all of their current status gets diluted by all of these new township voters.
Right, and that's
yeah, I can understand why they would not be too happy with that idea.
The city, it used to be they wanted to take over other townships to get more tax base.
On the margins.
Yeah, on the margins, a little piece by piece.
Yeah.
We used to call it cherry picking. Where
Sure.
they would
the
take
tax base.
They would take the best tax base and leave the less desirable,
Right.
high service areas.
Yeah, but now, since '78, these urban townships, Elmwood, East Bay, and Garfield, being charter townships, they've got a certain amount of annexation protection. It's not as easy for the city to cherry pick like it once was.
Right. So
Cherry pick, that's probably a good term up in this area, isn't it?
Yeah.
People like that. People like that name.
Yeah, maybe that's where it came from. But anyway, I thought, well, we've tried consolidations throughout the state. The only one that I know of that's been really successful is a Battle Creek Township joined the city of Battle Creek.
It was successful in terms that Kellogg Corporation basically put a gun to the head of the township residents and said, you either vote for this, give up your local government, or we're going to move our corporation headquarters someplace else.
Right.
So it passed, not overwhelmingly, but you know they had some 4,000 employees there that were potentially faced with, you either vote for this annexation or you lose your job.
Right.
So in turn, so what happened was the city had a higher millage rate, the township had a lower millage rate. They blended that, so if you were a township resident, your taxes went up. City resident, your taxes went down. Whether it was successful in terms of doing it, making anything positive, well, that's a hard one to call because you don't know what the history of that community would have been had it stayed the status quo.
Yeah, that's
so,
true.
you know, it's still a struggling city like most of the urban centers are down in the southern part of the state. So it certainly wasn't a panacea. I guess it's all still a matter of conjecture whether it was successful in terms of what it attempted to accomplish.
We've got a problem here with the city of Traverse City. Their expenses continue to go up every year. Their tax base isn't really keeping pace. The only way...
Now, why is that? I see a lot of construction and building. It seems like a vibrant community. Why?
It is vibrant, but it was accomplished with a DDA, partially. Let's face it, Traverse City beachfront properties, some of the best land in the state.
Or in the country.
Or in the country.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you really have to screw up badly to make a ghetto out of that situation, right? But still, they feel like they're in a box financially. They have zoning that they build the buildings higher and higher, so you're basically building a wall of concrete and steel around that bayfront that the people of Traverse City purchased over a 50-year period. And it's an open space, should be available to the public, but as time goes on and more condominiums and expensive stores are built, the people of this region are not going to be using that area as much as the people who move in from outside and buy the expensive properties. A lot of people that grew up here, moved out of Traverse City into the townships, they have no say in what happens in the city.
Do they want more of a say?
Well, if you look at the complaints, hear people complain about what the city's doing, yeah, they'd like to have a say, but I don't think they want to pay the taxes.
Right, probably not.
So anyway, my idea is all of this stuff should be talked about. And if this system of government, of 5 to 7 townships surrounding a city, if that isn't the most logical way to organize a community, why don't we change it? Why don't we
when you
talk
say
about
logic, logical in terms of what, toward what end?
Yeah, you're right. What is your goal?
Yeah.
I would say having the financial clout to hire the professionals you need. If you have 5 townships or 7 townships, you have 5 or 7 attorneys, 5 or 7 planning commissions.
Yeah, but you've talked about those attorneys. They're not on staff. They're not earning $100,000 a year. They're paid on either on a retainer basis, or they're paid on the amount of work that they do.
Right.
Yeah.
But a lot of the money that they earn is reviewing contracts between municipalities and sitting in on negotiations between the municipalities.
There's that much going on.
We have a lot going on here.
But isn't that a good thing? I mean, to have that much intergovernmental cooperation. Sometimes people think about local government as, oh, they're all just balkanized and they don't talk to each other and they're all little bit of individual fiefdoms. What I'm hearing from you is there's too much collaboration going on.
I don't say there's too much collaboration. It's a powerlessness. I was in a county commission meeting in 1992 when one of the septic haulers came in and said, we have a problem with the holding tanks. We can't empty the holding tanks in the wintertime. We need a big tank. It's going to cost $1 million. I could do it myself. I could borrow the money and put in a tank like that, but it should be at the county level. And so the county started working, and 10 years later, they finally built this septage plant. It grew from a place to take holding tank waste to a place to create Class A solids that you could put on farmers' fields and stuff. Well, it turned into an $8 million project from a $1 million project. And then when they built it, the walls fell down. And it was poorly built. And what had happened was they had negotiated for 10 years about what are we going to do, how are we going to pay for it. But in the end, they didn't do a good job. They got tired of fighting about it. And they said, we got to do something. Our engineers have been with us for a lot of years. Our DPW attorney's been with us for a lot of years. Let's just give it to them and go with it. And that's what happened. And it was a poor job.
Yeah,
but
consider your premise is that if this was all being done by a city of 40,000, none of that would have happened.
55,000.
Or 55.
Yeah.
The notion that a large city is going to be smarter, more efficient, more economical, is that really reflect reality?
Well, I think the cost advantage of the township is in the volunteers. You have so many people working for townships that are underpaid or not paid at all as planning commissioners.
To the taxpayer standpoint, they're saying, and there's a problem with that?
They're saving a lot of money. You're burning up a lot of volunteer time, people who want to be involved in the community, and then they get frustrated. They put in their years or whatever, and they get frustrated and they go away, and they haven't accomplished nearly what they had intended to do. So I think you could use that volunteer labor a lot more efficiently in a large community than in a small one.
Yeah, but larger communities have a harder time even attracting volunteers. That sense of community, that sense of ownership. Find volunteers in the city of Grand Rapids, the city of Detroit. They don't exist. They all have broken. Instead, they've gone into the neighborhood. They've turned their back on the municipality for their volunteer efforts, and now they're doing it all at the sub-city level without any real city oversight. Because frankly, the larger communities become so bureaucratically controlled. It's hard to find a place for volunteers in these larger units of government.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
How can you take the best of township government and the advantages of city government and put it together so you can save the money, like township government is saving a lot of money, and then city government has got full-time engineering staffs, full-time attorneys, and these people have advantages to what they have to offer as well. How can you put those together in a way that the taxpayers can save the money and still have a degree of control over their own government?
Yeah, unfortunately, Michigan law at the current stage doesn't really give you that opportunity for a hybrid, because there's no opportunity for the city to really disincorporate unless it was really within one township in its entirety, and it wasn't. I mean, it's kind of still carved out of pieces of existing townships. So what would happen, hypothetically, is it's not an annexation, there'd be a merger.
Right.
All of the townships would merge with the city, and then the city basically becomes the unit of government for that entire area. And with a city charter, and probably would look very much like this city, like Traverse City's charter right now today.
Another option would be the urban townships to join into one township. There's ways of consolidating townships.
Could be done.
And that would reduce the number of variables. See, every time, I was a chairman of the Beta board for a while, and what I've noticed was the people in the townships had to be represented. They were paying into the Beta board, so they had to be represented on the board. But a lot of the worst critics of the Beta system, that's the Bay Area Transportation Authority, the worst critics would be put on the Beta board to try to do something about their concerns. So you'd get people sitting on these boards that aren't loyal to the board they're on. They want to discredit maybe the Beta system and, maybe pull out of it. So they're using their position to not support the organization, but to undermine it. And I saw during union negotiations, we had a board member, I'm not going to use names, but the Beta buses were parking in front of the township hall, going in and talking to one of the board members that was coaching them on how to fight the management. And things like that. The more people you have on these boards have to be represented, the more variables, the more things can go wrong.
Well, that's the conflict that has to be resolved. On the one hand, there certainly are things like public transportation that needs to be done on a multi-jurisdictional basis to be efficient and effective. You can't have different bus lines stop at the township city boundaries. So there needs to be a certain degree of cooperation and a recognition that we're all in this together and we have a common cause here. And ironically, for the rest of the state, this area is held up as the best example of intergovernmental cooperation, far beyond what the rest of the state has done. You're talked about, you're the model up here. And of course, I know you probably see that as a work in progress. But to the extent that these people who are on these various joint boards and commissions start going off in different directions, the question has to be, is it because this body, this transportation, the sewer system, whatever it is it operating in a way that is consistent with the values and expectations of all of these different communities? And if they can't all agree, then the premise of a regional cooperation does fall apart. So any type of a consolidation such as what you're talking about, Jack, and you know this, that it all has to be approved by the voters individually in each unit of government. So if you're a citizen of East Bay or Elmwood or Garfield, or if you got ambitious enough, pull in Acme. You'd look at this proposal for a new greater Traverse City, and you'd say, first off, well, do we have more in common than we have differences? Are the values and expectations of my community consistent with what the general people in this big area are going to be? Am I going to lose influence? Is my vision of what my piece of this looks like going to be altered? Will I have suitable voice in it? And then finally, people look at the different millage rates. And the city is levying how many mills?
I think they're close to 18.
Okay, 18 mills. How many is East Bay levying?
Probably between 3 and 4. Something
Okay,
like that.
look at that disparity. Now we're going to meld this. So why would somebody in East Bay say, gee, I think I'm more than willing to pay 12 or 13 mills, whatever this conglomeration is going to be. I'm willing to pay 10 more mills than what I'm paying right now for the sake of having, now I have, what's the population of East Bay?
They're around 10,000.
Okay, I have 1/10,000th of the influence here. Now I'm going to have 1/56,000th of the
Right.
influence. I'm going to be a smaller piece of this. That's a hard sell.
You're right. You're right. It is a hard sell. And it really is a question of, are you part of a greater community or not? When I go to somewhere, I say I'm from Traverse City. Actually, my mailing address is Traverse City, but Traverse City is the whole area to a large degree. And a lot of people identify themselves as being from Traverse City, but in Traverse City, they identify themselves as being from Acme or from Peninsula or something like that.
And
so that's the problem that we have.
But I think the frame, are you part of a greater community or not, is a false dichotomy. You can have it both ways, with tensions and problems and the messiness that you've acknowledged. You can have it both ways, that communities where they can see that it makes sense to cooperate, either from a cost effectiveness standpoint or because we can serve our communities better, we can be more efficient. Communities look for opportunities to do that, but then there comes a limit where you say, you know, we've got a lot of farmland. It does not make sense for the farmers in my township to be city residents.
Right.
And then you start balancing it. And these suburbs, they don't want to be on water and sewer. They're going to stay on wells and septic. So we don't need streetlights. You know, they start looking, they start parsing out the services and say, you know, I can get by with what the township is providing. I'm willing to have the township cooperate with Beta and with certain other things. But there is a way to kind of have your cake and eat it too. But it is messy. And you have to put up with and understand that it's continuously having to renegotiate these agreements and make concessions and agreements change when circumstances change.
I think we've laid out the problem. The solution will not be at this table. It'll be the people themselves making those decisions.
Well stated.
I know that you are on a tight time schedule, and I appreciate your coming.
My pleasure.
And helping with us.
Thank you for advancing the discussion.
Thanks. Yep.
Thank you.